In the heart of the city stood a vibrant marketplace, its streets teeming with the hustle and bustle of daily life. The air was filled with the sense of sizzling food, fresh produce, and handcrafted goods. Vendors lined the street, each vying for attention, offering everything from fragrant spices to unique trinkets. But amidst this colorful patchwork of commerce, there was one stall that always stood out, a small, humble cart run by a man who, despite his unassuming nature, had a loyal following in the community. This man, Nathaniel, was a black veteran who had served his country with pride, and though his uniform had long since been put away, the respect he had earned remained etched in the hearts of those who knew him. His cart was filled with homemade goods, handcrafted wooden carvings, quilts sewn with care, and jars of jams made from fruits grown in his own garden. It was a simple business, but it thrived, not just because of the quality of the items, but because of the warmth and generosity that Nathaniel exuded. He was a quiet man, with a gentle smile and a soft-spoken demeanor, but his presence in the marketplace was undeniable. The locals loved him. They would stop by his cart not only to buy something, but to share a conversation, a laugh, or a memory. Nathaniel had lived a life full of struggles and triumphs, and yet he never complained. He had served in the military, fought for his country, and come home to a world that often didn't understand him. But here, in this marketplace, he had found his place. Surrounded by people who appreciated him for who he was, his cart had become a staple, a symbol of resilience and community in the face of adversity. Yet not everyone in the marketplace shared the same fondness for Nathaniel. Among the sea of vendors there was one man who seemed to have little regard for the people around him, the landlord of the marketplace, a brash, arrogant man named Mr. Jenkins. He had inherited his position, and with it, a sense of entitlement that he wore like armor. To him, the marketplace was simply a business, a means to line his pockets. He cared little for the community or the people who made it thrive. It wasn't long before Mr. Jenkins noticed Nathaniel's cart. At first, it was the steady stream of customers that drew his attention. Nathaniel's cart had become one of the most popular spots in the marketplace, and to Mr. Jenkins, that was a problem. His eyes narrowed as he watched the veteran engage with his customers. His soft-spoken words met with smiles and laughter. Nathaniel was, in his eyes, an anomaly, someone who didn't belong in this bustling commercial environment. His presence disrupted the order Mr. Jenkins tried so hard to maintain. One afternoon, Mr. Jenkins approached Nathaniel's cart with an air of superiority. He didn't greet the veteran with warmth or respect. Instead, he looked at him with disdain. "You're drawing too much attention, old man," he sneered, his tone laced with arrogance. "This is a business, not some charity case." Nathaniel, ever the professional, looked up at the landlord, his face calm, though there was a flicker of confusion in his eyes. He didn't fully understand the animosity that radiated from the man before him. All he had ever wanted was to work, to provide for himself, and to contribute to the community he had come to love. But Mr. Jenkins wasn't done. He had made up his mind about Nathaniel, and it wasn't going to change. "I've had enough of this. You're not welcome here anymore," he said, his words sharp as a whip. Without further warning, he grabbed hold of the cart and began to forcefully move it. Nathaniel, shocked by the sudden aggression, stepped back, unsure of how to respond. The once peaceful marketplace, where he had found refuge, suddenly felt hostile, as if it had turned against him. Nathaniel's life hadn't always been like this. Once, He had been a proud soldier, wearing his country's uniform with honor. He had enlisted at a young age, driven by a sense of duty and the desire to protect his fellow citizens. For years, he had served with distinction, traveling to far-off lands, enduring hardships that most people couldn't fathom. He had fought on foreign soil, lived through battles that scarred his body and mind, and lost friends he would never see again. But when the time came to return home, Nathaniel was met with a reality that was nothing like the one he had imagined. The transition from soldier to civilian was a brutal one. There were no parades waiting for him, no warm welcomes. Instead, there were the cold stares of those who saw him as just another statistic, another veteran struggling to find his place. The job market was unkind to men like him, veterans with experience in combat, but little in the way of the modern skills required to thrive in a rapidly changing world. His attempts to find steady work were met with rejection after rejection. No one seemed to care about his service. They saw only a man who had been broken by the years of war. But Nathaniel wasn't one to give up easily. He wasn't the type to sit idly by and let life pass him. With no other options, he began doing what he had always loved, crafting. He had learned the art of woodworking during his downtime in the military, a hobby that had always provided him with a sense of peace. So, he took what little savings he had left and invested in a few simple tools. He began to carve, create, and craft items by hand. Small wooden trinkets, carved figures, and other unique pieces that he could sell. With every sale, he managed to scrape by, earning just enough to keep the lights on and put food on the table for his family. He didn't make much, but it was enough. It was a humble existence, but it was one that allowed him to hold his head high. He worked from a small cart, setting up shop in various parts of the city, hoping to attract enough attention to make a living. His goods weren't just items to buy, they were pieces of him, of his soul. And the people who bought from him saw that. They saw the pride he took in his work, the passion behind each carved figure, and they appreciated it. Nathaniel's small business slowly gained traction. His cart became a familiar sight in the local marketplace, and the community began to embrace him. They recognized the man for what he was, a hard-working, humble individual who had served his country and was now trying to rebuild his life. Many came to buy his goods, but just as many came to chat with him, to hear his stories, and to offer their support. Nathaniel had found a sense of belonging in a world that had for too long been indifferent to his struggles. But not everyone saw Nathaniel's success the way the community did. The landlord of the marketplace, Mr. Jenkins, was a wealthy, arrogant man who owned the land where Nathaniel's cart stood. Mr. Jenkins was the epitome of privilege and entitlement, a man who looked down on those he considered inferior. To him, Nathaniel's small success wasn't something to be celebrated. It was a threat to his image. In a world where appearance was everything, the veteran's cart, with its humble nature and the respect it had earned, didn't fit the mold Mr. Jenkins had created. He saw the veteran's growing popularity as a disruption to the order he had carefully crafted. In his eyes, Nathaniel didn't belong among the other vendors who had the right image and status in his eyes. Nathaniel's success, built on hard work and community trust, was nothing more than a reminder that someone like him, someone without wealth or status, could carve out a place in the world. And to Mr. Jenkins, that was something he could not tolerate. The morning air was crisp as Nathaniel opened his cart, the familiar creak of its wheels offering a small comfort, as he began setting up his space for for another busy day in the marketplace. The sunlight was still gentle, casting long shadows across the stalls, and the scent of fresh bread from the bakery nearby mingled with the earthy aroma of Nathaniel's handmade goods. He worked quickly but with care, arranging his wooden carvings, neatly stacked quilts, and jars of jam, all reflecting the love he put into each piece. As he worked, he could hear the low hum of the marketplace waking up around him, vendors calling out to potential customers, the clatter of cash registers, the sound of fruit and vegetables being arranged. Nathaniel was proud of the little corner he had carved out for himself. His presence here had become a fixture, something the community had come to rely on and even look forward to. The conversations with his regular customers, the familiar faces that greeted him each day, were his reward for the long hours he had spent perfecting his craft. He didn't mind the hard work. It was a labor of love that kept him grounded. But that morning, something felt different. There was a tension in the air, a flicker of discomfort that Nathaniel couldn't quite place. He had been too busy to notice, but now, as he organized a basket of fruit preserves, he sensed someone watching him. His heart sank when he turned to see Mr. Jenkins, the landlord of the marketplace, standing a few feet away, his arms crossed and his expression cold. Mr. Jenkins had always kept his distance from Nathaniel, but today there was an edge to his demeanor, a sharpness in his eyes that Nathaniel hadn't seen before. The landlord's gaze was fixed on the cart, and the veteran couldn't help but feel a tightness in his chest as the man approached. "You," Mr. Jenkins began, his voice laced with irritation, "what do you think you're doing here?" Nathaniel paused, his heart racing. He had been coming to this marketplace for months, paying the agreed-upon rent to Mr. Jenkins every week without fail. He had done nothing wrong. "I'm just setting up, Mr. Jenkins. I've paid all my dues as usual," Mr. Jenkins sneered, his eyes scanning the cart as though he was searching for an excuse to complain. "I don't think you're authorized to be here anymore. You're drawing too much attention. People are stopping for your cart, making a scene. It's bad for business." Nathaniel's heart sank as he listened to the words coming from the landlord. He had heard the whispers before, the undercurrent of resentment that Nathaniel's simple cart, his success, seemed to stir in Mr. Jenkins. But hearing it out loud felt like a slap in the face. "I've been here for months," Nathaniel replied, trying to stay calm, even as his fingers clenched at his sides. "I've paid the fees, and I have permission to be here." The landlord's jaw tightened, his lips curling into a scowl. "Permission?" he barked. "You don't belong here. You're not part of this place." His voice grew louder, attracting the attention of a few nearby customers who had paused their shopping to watch the unfolding confrontation. "You're nothing but a distraction." Before Nathaniel could respond, Mr. Jenkins reached behind him, pulling out a heavy wooden bat from the side of his stall. The crowd fell silent, stunned by the sight. Nathaniel's heart raced, his pulse thumping in his ears. He had no idea what the landlord intended, but the anger in his eyes was unmistakable. "Enough of this," Mr. Jenkins growled. With one swift motion, he swung the bat down onto Nathaniel's cart, smashing the wood and sending pieces of it flying into the air. The sound of the bat striking the cart echoed through the marketplace, and gasps of shock rippled through the crowd. People stood frozen, too stunned to react, as the once proud cart was torn apart. Nathaniel stood there, a mix of disbelief and sorrow flooding his chest. His livelihood, his creation, was being destroyed right in front of his eyes, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. His eyes burned with anger, but he did not raise his voice. He didn't retaliate. Instead, he watched as the landlord continued to swing, each blow further disassembling his cart. The tools, the jars, the carvings, all the hard work he had put into it, shattered in an instant. The onlookers began to stir. Some pulled out their phones, recording the incident as if it were some kind of spectacle. A few customers, familiar faces from the marketplace, began to speak up. "Hey, what are you doing?" One woman called out, stepping forward, her voice sharp with outrage. "This is not right. He's been here for months." "Yeah," another man shouted. "Nathaniel's been nothing but respectful. He has every right to be here." But Mr. Jenkins, fueled by arrogance and the racist disdain he had carried with him for years, ignored them. "Stay out of this," he snapped, swinging the bat again. "I'll deal with this how I see fit. You don't get to tell me what to do." Despite the scene unfolding in front of him, Nathaniel remained calm, his face set in a mask of quiet dignity. He stood tall, holding his ground, even as his livelihood was obliterated. He didn't shout, didn't raise his voice in anger. Instead, he spoke softly, his words cutting through the chaos. "You've made your point, Mr. Jenkins," he said, his voice steady, "but you'll never take my dignity." The landlord faltered, the words hitting him harder than he expected. For a moment, there was a crack in his resolve, as if Nathaniel's calmness had somehow unsettled him. But then, as if remembering his superiority, Mr. Jenkins sneered once more, turning his back on the crowd and walking away, the bat still gripped tightly in his hand. The silence that followed was thick with tension. People stared in disbelief, the weight of what had just happened hanging in the air. Many still had their phones out, their screens filled with the wreckage of Nathaniel's cart. But there was no satisfaction in the act of recording. They saw the injustice of it, the cruelty of one man's power over another, a power that had been used recklessly. But Nathaniel didn't let the silence consume him. He took a deep breath, looking around at the crowd, at the people who had witnessed the cruelty. And then, with a quiet resolve, he began to gather what was left of his cart. Though it was broken, though it had been reduced to pieces, Nathaniel's spirit remained unbroken. Some customers stepped forward, offering their help to pick up the shards, their faces filled with regret. "We'll help you rebuild, Nathaniel," one man said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "This isn't right, and we'll make sure people know what happened." The veteran nodded, his expression calm but resolute. "I appreciate it," he said softly, his gaze still lingering on the wreckage. "But I'll rebuild it myself, one piece at a time. I've always known how to put things back together." The community had spoken, and they would not let this act of cruelty go unnoticed. The damage done by Mr. Jenkins's outburst reverberated far beyond the marketplace that day. As the hours passed, the viral storm began to build, sweeping through social media like wildfire. The video, taken by a bystander who had recorded the destruction of Nathaniel's cart, was shared across every platform imaginable. It was impossible to ignore. The image of a black veteran, calm in the face of destruction, as a brash landlord tore apart his livelihood, was impossible to look away from. The video captured the cruelty, the injustice, and, most powerfully, the dignity Nathaniel had maintained through it all. By the time evening fell, the video had already gone viral. Hashtags like #Justice for Nathaniel and #Stand Against Racism flooded Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. The clip was replayed on news stations, shown in high schools and colleges, and discussed in living rooms all over the country. People from all walks of life were enraged, activists, military veterans, and ordinary citizens who couldn't stand the thought of one man's abuse of power over another. The outrage was palpable, and voices from across the nation demanded justice for Nathaniel, for the veteran who had given so much to his country and had been wronged so callously. Veterans groups spoke out in solidarity, condemning Mr. Jenkins for his actions, calling his behavior disgraceful. "This is not how we treat our heroes," one group stated in a public release. "Nathaniel fought for this country, and now he's being beaten down by the very system he defended. We won't stand for it." Activists, who had been vocal in the fight against systemic injustice, rallied behind Nathaniel's cause, organizing protests and encouraging people to sign petitions calling for Mr. Jenkins' removal from his position as landlord. Influential public figures, some of whom had never met Nathaniel, shared the video, using their platforms to call attention to the discrimination and violence that had taken place. As the days passed, Nathaniel's story became a rallying cry. People from all over the world expressed their outrage, and many began donating to funds set up to help rebuild Nathaniel's life and business. The community that had once quietly admired his resilience now took a stand, demanding not only justice for the destruction of his cart, but also for the systemic racism that had inspired the act in the first place. Amidst this growing storm, one individual, far removed from Nathaniel's daily life, found himself deeply affected by the events. Matthew Henderson, a wealthy philanthropist and former military officer, had been scrolling through social media when he stumbled upon the video. The raw emotion in the footage struck him hard, but it was something more than just the injustice that grabbed his attention. There was something familiar about the man in the video, the calm composure, the strength despite the cruelty. Something about Nathaniel's face, the way he stood, told Matthew that this was a man who had endured far more than the destruction of a cart. A moment of recognition hit Matthew like a wave. He remembered Nathaniel from his service days, a fellow soldier who had served alongside him during a difficult deployment overseas. Matthew remembered the quiet strength Nathaniel had shown back then, the way he had carried his team through tough situations, never seeking praise. He was a man who had given so much to this country, and Matthew had never imagined that someone who had fought so bravely would one day face such cruelty. Determined to make things right, Matthew immediately began taking action. He contacted local organizations and began reaching out to veterans groups that were supporting Nathaniel's cause, pledging to contribute not only financially, but also by providing Nathaniel with a platform to tell his story. Matthew understood that the damage Mr. Jenkins had done went far beyond the physical destruction. It was a reflection of a deeper, systemic issue that had to be addressed. He vowed to use his wealth, influence, and connections to not only ensure justice for Nathaniel, but also to ensure that his story would help inspire change. In the quiet of his office, Matthew began drafting plans to reach out to Nathaniel. He wasn't sure what the next steps would be, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let this man's dignity be trampled any longer. Nathaniel had been wronged, but now he had an ally, one who understood the true meaning of honor and sacrifice. The morning after Matthew Henderson made his decision, the winds of change began to blow swiftly and decisively. With a mix of resolve and urgency, he arrived at the marketplace, a place he had visited countless times before. But today, the atmosphere was charged with a different energy, one that reflected the ongoing fallout from Mr. Jenkins' disgraceful actions. The crowd that had gathered earlier in support of Nathaniel had only grown, their voices calling for justice, for retribution. Matthew's presence was commanding as he walked into the marketplace with a purpose. The crowd parted as he made his way towards the heart of the issue, Mr. Jenkins, standing with his arms crossed, stubbornly clutching the reins of his position. He looked the same as always, arrogant and dismissive, unaware of the storm brewing around him. But the moment Matthew addressed him, the atmosphere shifted. "Mr. Jenkins," Matthew began, his voice unwavering, "I'm here to inform you that you are being removed from your position as landlord of this marketplace." The words hit like a thunderclap, leaving Jenkins speechless. His face turned a deep shade of crimson as he stammered in protest, but Matthew was resolute. "Your actions have caused irreparable damage to both this marketplace and its tenants. Your behavior is not only unlawful, but morally reprehensible. Effective immediately, you are no longer in charge here." As the crowd gathered to witness this dramatic confrontation, murmurs of approval rippled through the air. It was a moment of redemption for the community, a moment where the powerful were held accountable for their actions. But the good news didn't end there for Nathaniel. Matthew, in his determination to right the wrongs done to the veteran, turned to Nathaniel and made an offer that would change his life. "Nathaniel," he said, "I've arranged for a brand-new, fully equipped shop in this marketplace. You'll have it rent-free for life. You've earned your place here, and I'm making sure you'll have every opportunity to thrive." Tears welled in Nathaniel's eyes as he looked at the philanthropist. He had never imagined something like this could happen, not in his wildest dreams. The community that had once rallied around him now stood behind him in full force, their support now tangible in the form of a business space that would allow him to continue his work and provide for his family. As for Mr. Jenkins, his fall from grace was swift and brutal. The destruction of Nathaniel's property was not the only charge against him. Multiple lawsuits were filed, accusing him of years of discriminatory behavior toward other tenants. Former residents of the marketplace came forward, sharing stories of mistreatment and abuse. The weight of these complaints, combined with the damage to Nathaniel's cart, led to a sharp decline in Jenkins' business. His financial empire crumbled, and he found himself in the midst of legal battles he could not win. Karma had struck hard and swiftly, and Mr. Jenkins's arrogance had cost him everything. The marketplace was no longer a place where he could exert control. It was now a place of justice, a space where hard work and dignity could thrive, no matter who you were or where you came from. As the days passed, Nathaniel's new shop became a symbol of resilience and triumph. It wasn't just a place to sell handmade goods. It was a living testament to his perseverance, his strength in the face of adversity, and the unwavering support of a community that refused to let injustice go unchallenged. Word spread quickly throughout the city, and the marketplace, once a place of quiet transactions, now buzzed with renewed energy. The local community, who had witnessed the destruction of Nathaniel's cart, stood behind him in ways they never had before. They came in droves to support him, buying his goods, sharing their stories, and spreading the word about his incredible journey. His small corner of the marketplace flourished. Nathaniel's work, once a quiet act of survival, became a source of pride for those who supported him. Each sale, each handshake, was more than a transaction. It was an affirmation of the values they all shared: community, justice, and hard work. But Nathaniel didn't stop there. He knew that there were other veterans like him, men and women who had sacrificed so much for the country, only to return to find the world had little to offer them in return. With his newfound platform, he began reaching out to other struggling veterans, offering them a place to share their stories and selling their own crafts in his shop. He worked with local organizations to provide resources and support, helping veterans find their way back to stability. His shop was no longer just a business. It was a place where veterans could find hope, a place where they could be reminded that their sacrifices were not forgotten. As the marketplace continued to thrive, Nathaniel's impact reached beyond just the local community. He became a beacon of hope for others, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, resilience could light the way. He knew the path ahead would still be difficult, but with the support of those around him, he felt ready for whatever challenges came his way. The camera slowly panned out across the marketplace, showing Nathaniel's shop brimming with customers, his face beaming with pride as he spoke with a group of veterans who had come to offer their support. The once wrecked cart now lay behind him, transformed into a thriving, bustling space. In the distance, the former landlord, Mr. Jenkins, walked away from the marketplace. His arrogant stride had been replaced with a heavy, defeated gait. The place that had once been his empire was no longer his. No one noticed him as he passed by. In the end, the community had chosen to support the man who had given his all, not to tear him down, but to help him rise. Jenkins, once the symbol of power and control, was now an afterthought, forgotten by those who had stood together for what was right. The story had come full circle. In the marketplace of justice, resilience, and hope, Nathaniel had triumphed.